They called it the governor's game, a spectacle for rich men who craved the thrill of blood and power. Governor Silas Vance turned his plantation into a hunting ground where the prey weren't animals, but people. Shackled men released into the swamp at dawn, their screams swallowed by the trees. But this time, one of the runners didn't run. His name was Ben, quiet, watchful, too calm for a man marked for death. The governor didn't know that. Before chains, before capture, before America. Ben had led warriors. He had hunted lions. He had commanded fear itself. When the horns sounded and the riders charged, the forest turned silent. By nightfall, the hunters were the ones disappearing, one by one. And somewhere in that darkness, a whisper rose through the fog. You taught men to hunt what they don't understand. Now learn what it means to be prey. Because this time, the sport was no longer a game. It was justice. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The Mississippi sun crept through the morning mist like a predator stalking prey. It touched the fields of Vance Estate slowly, deliberately, revealing row after row of cotton plants that stretched toward a horizon most who worked them would never see. The air hung thick and wet, already promising the kind of heat that would press down on backs and shoulders like an invisible hand. In the fields, bodies moved in practiced rhythm. Hands picked. Heads stayed low. No one spoke unless spoken to. No one looked up unless ordered. This was the law of Vance Estate, written not in ink, but in scars. 3 overseers on horseback watched the workers with rifles across their laps. The youngest, a thin man named Hutchins, spat tobacco juice into the dirt and squinted at the tree line where the forest began. From somewhere deep in those woods came the distant crack of gunfire, followed by the baying of hounds. He grinned. "Governor's got himself a runner this morning," Hutchins said to the overseer beside him, a thick-necked man everyone called Bull. "Third one this week." Bull grunted. He didn't smile. He'd been at Vance Estate longer than most, and had seen what happened to runners. Hunting them was one thing. What came after was something else entirely. The gunfire echoed again. Then silence. "Got him," Hutchins said, satisfied. "Governor, don't miss." In the field below, a man paused in his picking. He was broader than most of the others, with shoulders that spoke of a different kind of labor than cotton. His skin bore the deep darkness of the West African coast, and his hands, though calloused from months of forced work, moved with a strange precision. He lifted his head slightly, listening to the sound of distant death, then returned to his task. His name, written in the overseer's ledger, was Ben. But that was not his true name. Bull noticed the pause. "You," he called out. "Big man. Keep them hands moving." Ben's hands moved. His face showed nothing. "Strange one, that," Hutchins muttered. "Too quiet. Don't trust a slave that quiet." "They all quiet when they know better," Bull said. But he watched Ben anyway. Something about the man's calm unsettled him in ways he couldn't name. By late afternoon, the hunting party returned. Governor Silas Vance rode at the front on a magnificent chestnut mare, his riding clothes pristine, despite hours in the swamp. Behind him came 4 guests on their own horses, 2 senators from neighboring counties, a wealthy colonel from Natchez, and a young lawyer eager to curry favor with powerful men. They laughed and joked, passing a silver flask between them. Tied to the saddle of the colonel's horse was a bloodied body, dragged face down through the mud. The hounds circled the horses, tongues lolling, tails wagging, as if they'd done something worth celebrating. The workers in the fields kept their heads down. They knew better than to look at what the hunters brought back. Governor Vance dismounted with practiced grace. He was a handsome man by any measure, tall, well-groomed, with silver threading through his dark hair, in a way that suggested wisdom rather than age. His eyes were sharp and cold. When he smiled, it looked genuine. That was what made him dangerous. "Gentlemen," he announced to his guests, "that was merely an appetizer. Tomorrow night we feast on something more substantial." The colonel laughed. "You promised us a real challenge this time, Silas. That runner today barely made it to the creek bed." "Patience, Charles. Patience." The governor's smile widened. "I have something special planned for the next hunt. A runner who will make you earn your prize." From the porch of the great house, a woman watched the men with an expression carved from marble. Margaret Vance wore a dress of deep green silk, her auburn hair pinned elegantly beneath a lace cap. She stood perfectly still, hands folded at her waist, the picture of southern grace. Only her eyes moved, tracking the bloodied body being untied from the saddle. She said nothing. She had learned, long ago, that words changed nothing. Silas noticed her watching. He waved, his gesture magnanimous, performative. She nodded once and turned away, disappearing into the shadows of the house. That evening, the great house blazed with lamplight. In the dining room, crystal glasses caught the glow of chandeliers as servants brought course after course of rich food. The hunting party had been joined by additional guests from neighboring estates, all eager to participate in what Governor Vance called sport. At the head of the table, Silas raised his glass. His voice carried the polished tones of education and breeding. "Gentlemen, I trust you found today's hunt satisfactory. But tomorrow we begin something greater." The governor's game has become famous throughout Mississippi for one reason. We do not hunt the weak. We hunt the defiant. We hunt the proud. We hunt those who believe they can escape what God Himself ordained. The men at the table murmured approval. The young lawyer leaned forward, eager. "And who is tomorrow's runner?" asked one of the senators. Silas swirled his wine, considering. "A recent acquisition, strong as an ox, hardly speaks. But there's something about him. The way he looks at a man, as if he knows something we don't." He laughed. "I think it's time to teach him what he should know instead." "What's his name?" the colonel asked. "The overseers call him Ben. West African, we believe. Came through Charleston on a French slaver. Tried to organize the others on the crossing. They broke 3 whips on his back before he stopped fighting." Silas smiled. "That's the kind of spirit that makes a hunt worthwhile." Margaret sat at the opposite end of the table, silent, untouched food on her plate. She felt the weight of complicity settling over her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She looked down at her hands, pale and soft, and wondered when she had stopped being a person who could do anything but sit in silence. Night fell over Vance Estate like a curtain dropping on a stage. In the slave quarters, small fires flickered outside rough wooden cabins. People spoke in whispers, sharing what little food they had, tending to wounds both old and fresh. Ben sat alone outside his cabin, which he shared with 3 other men. They had learned to give him space. He stared toward the main house where torchlight danced in the windows. The sound of laughter drifted across the distance, foreign and grotesque. He whispered something in a language no one at Vance Estate had ever heard, words that belonged to a kingdom across the ocean, to councils of war held beneath different stars. In the darkness near the main house, the hounds began to bark. Morning broke cold despite the promise of heat to come. Mist clung to the ground like the breath of something dead, reluctant to rise. In the yard between the slave quarters and the main house, a space had been cleared. The dirt there was hard-packed from years of assemblies, auctions, and punishment. It remembered blood. The sound came first, the clank and scrape of chains being dragged across stone, then voices, sharp with command. Overseers emerged from the quarters, pulling 5 men behind them, wrists bound in iron, ankles connected by short lengths of chain that forced them to shuffle rather than walk. Each step was measured, each movement an assertion of control. Bull walked ahead, rifle in the crook of his arm. Behind him came Hutchins and two others, all armed. They positioned the 5 men in a line facing the main house, then forced them to their knees with rifle butts against shoulders. The chains rattled. The men said nothing. Ben knelt fourth in line. His face remained blank, but his eyes moved constantly, tracking every detail. The positions of the overseers, the distance to the tree line, the way the morning light fell through the oaks, creating shadows deep enough to hide in. The door of the great house opened. Governor Silas Vance stepped onto the wide porch, dressed for sport in tailored riding clothes of deep brown leather. His boots gleamed. His rifle, custom-made with silver inlay along the barrel, rested against his shoulder with casual confidence. Behind him came his guests, equally well-dressed, equally eager. They carried weapons that cost more than most men would earn in a lifetime. From around the estate, overseers herded the other slaves into the yard. Men, women, and children were forced to stand in clusters, made to watch what would happen next. This was part of the theater. The lesson had to be public. Fear worked best when witnessed. Margaret Vance stood at a second-floor window, partially hidden by curtains. She watched through glass that reflected her face, back at her like an accusation. Silas descended the porch steps slowly, savoring the moment. He walked along the line of kneeling men, studying each one with the practiced eye of someone evaluating property. He paused at the first man, a young field worker with scars across his back from a previous punishment. "This one ran last year," Silas said conversationally to his guests. "Made it 3 miles before the dogs caught him. Let's see if he's learned anything since." He moved to the second man, older, with gray threading through his hair. Strong back, stubborn mind. Should provide some challenge. The third was barely 20, trembling visibly. Silas smiled at that. Fear makes them fast. Sometimes. Then he came to Ben. The governor stopped. He circled slowly, examining Ben from all angles. The other guests gathered closer, curious. Even kneeling, Ben was imposing. His shoulders were broad enough to suggest strength that went beyond field labor. His hands, though bound, remained steady. But it was his face that drew attention. The complete absence of fear, the unsettling calm that seemed to exist independent of circumstance. Silas crouched down to meet Ben's eyes. "You're a quiet one. Overseers tell me you barely speak. Is that true?" Ben said nothing. "But you understand me." "I can see it." Silas tapped the side of his head. "You're thinking. Always thinking. I've seen that look before. You know what happens to slaves who think too much?" Silence. Silas stood, addressing his guests. This one came from the coastal kingdoms. French slaver brought him through Charleston after a raid on one of their villages. The manifest said he fought like a demon on the crossing. Killed 2 sailors with his bare hands before they managed to chain him properly. He smiled. "That's the spirit I want in my hunts. Not broken animals, but men who still believe they have a chance." He returned his attention to Ben. "You've got the eyes of a hunter, boy. Let's see if they help you run." For the first time, Ben spoke. His voice was deep, accented but clear, each word chosen with precision. A hunter always returns to the place where the blood was first spilled. The yard went silent. Even the birds seemed to pause. The statement hung in the air like smoke, its meaning uncertain, but its weight undeniable. The other slaves shifted uneasily. The guests exchanged glances. Hutchins tightened his grip on his rifle. Silas's smile froze on his face. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not fear exactly, but a cousin of it. Recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgement that he had heard something he wasn't supposed to hear. Then he laughed. It was a performance, loud and dismissive, designed to reclaim control. Listen to him, talking in riddles like some kind of prophet. Well, prophet, you'll have your chance to prove your words mean something. All of you will. He stepped back, addressing the assembled slaves. His voice carried across the yard with practiced authority. Watch closely. Watch what happens to those who think they can escape what they are. This is God's order. This is nature. The strong hunt, the weak run, and in the end, justice always catches up. Near the main house, half hidden among the other servants, Elias stood with a crystal decanter in his hands. He was 17, small-framed, with sandy hair and eyes that had learned to see without looking. He wore the plain dark clothes of household staff, clean but simple. His job was to refill glasses, carry messages, and disappear when not needed. He watched the scene in the yard with something burning behind his ribs. Shame, rage, helplessness. He had seen this before. He would see it again. And each time, he did nothing. The governor turned to Bull. Take them to the North Woods. Give them their head start at the creek bed. 1 hour, then we ride. Bull nodded. Yes, sir. The overseers hauled the 5 men to their feet. They were marched across the yard, through the gate, and toward the distant tree line where the forest waited. The other slaves were forced to remain standing, made to watch until the figures disappeared into the shadows beneath the trees. Silas returned to the porch where his guests waited. Servants appeared with trays of morning refreshments, sweet rolls, coffee, fresh fruit. The men ate and drank while discussing strategy, comparing weapons, placing friendly wagers on who would make the first kill. Elias moved among them, refilling cups, invisible as furniture. He heard their laughter, their casual predictions of death, their complete lack of doubt that they were doing anything wrong. When he poured wine for the governor, his hand trembled slightly. Silas didn't notice. Margaret watched from her window until she couldn't bear to watch any more. She turned away and sat at her writing desk, staring at blank paper, unable to write anything that mattered. At the edge of the North Woods, by a creek bed where the water ran shallow and clear, the 5 men stood in a rough line. Bull unlocked their chains one by one, dropping the iron into a pile at his feet. The metal rang against metal like a broken bell. You know the rules, Bull said, his voice flat. 1 hour head start. Then the governor and his men ride out. You can run anywhere in the property. Woods, swamps, fields, don't matter. Cross the property line, and the neighboring estates will shoot you for trespass. Stay here, and you get hunted. He paused. Ain't no good choice, but them's your option. He stepped back. The other overseers mounted their horses, rifles ready, but not yet aimed. Bull pulled out a pocket watch and checked the time. Then he raised his eyes to the tree line. Governor'll fire the starting shot when he's ready. Until then, you wait. Minutes passed. The 5 men stood in the weak morning light, free of chains, but not free. The young one was crying silently. The older man stretched his back, preparing muscles for what was coming. Ben remained still, his gaze fixed on something distant and invisible. From across the fields came the sound of hoofbeats. The hunting party approached at a leisurely pace, in no particular hurry. They formed a loose line facing the creek bed, rifles across their laps, dogs straining at their leads. Governor Silas Vance rode at the center. He drew his custom pistol from its holster and held it high above his head. Sunlight caught the silver inlay, making it flash like a signal fire. Gentlemen, he called out to his guests, let the governor's game begin. He fired into the air. The gunshot cracked across the morning like thunder. The 5 men ran. They disappeared into the dense forest as if swallowed whole. The hunt had begun. The early morning mist clung to the trees like wet silk. Ben moved through the underbrush with steps so deliberate they barely disturbed the fallen leaves. While the other runners crashed through the forest in blind panic, he walked as if he had all the time in the world. He paused every few yards to listen, not just for pursuit, but for the forest itself. The way birds shifted in the branches, the direction of the wind, the distant sound of water moving over stone. These were the things that mattered. These were the things that kept a man alive. Behind him, back at the creek bed, he could hear the hunters mounting up. Their laughter carried through the trees like the cawing of crows. They were in no hurry. They believed they had already won. "Should have it wrapped up by noon." "I'll take the young one. Looked like he could run." "$20 says I bag 2 before sundown." Their voices faded as Ben moved deeper into the woods. He crossed a small stream, stepping on rocks to avoid leaving tracks in the mud. On the far side, he found what he was looking for. A game trail, narrow and winding, used by deer and wild pigs. Animals knew the forest better than any man. Their paths led to water, to shelter, to places where the undergrowth was thinnest. He followed the trail for half a mile before he heard crashing through the brush to his left. One of the other runners appeared, the young one who had been crying at the creek bed. His face was streaked with tears and dirt, his breathing ragged with terror. "Please," the young man gasped. "Please, we gotta hide, we gotta—" Ben raised a hand, signaling silence. The young man's mouth snapped shut. Ben tilted his head, listening. No dogs yet. No hoofbeats close. They had time, but not much. Ben pointed to a massive oak tree 20 yards ahead. Its lowest branches were thick, spreading wide enough to support weight. "Climb," he said quietly, "as high as you can. Stay still. Don't move for anything. Not until full dark. What about you? I'm not hiding. But they'll—" "Climb. Now." The young man hesitated, then ran for the tree. Ben watched him pull himself up, branch by branch, until he disappeared into the canopy. Good. One less body for the governor's trophies. Ben kept moving. He didn't go deeper into the woods like the others would. Instead, he angled southwest toward the part of the estate where the solid ground gave way to swamp. Most people feared swamps. The smell, the standing water, the snakes and insects. But Ben knew swamps. He knew how they could hide a man, how they could swallow sounds, how they could turn solid ground into something treacherous for those who didn't understand the difference between mud and quicksand. The hunters rarely went that way. It was hard terrain for horses. The dogs didn't like it. And the governor's guests preferred their sport comfortable. By midday, the forest was hot and still. Ben had made it to the edge of the swamp. Here the trees grew different, cypress and tupelo, their roots rising from dark water like twisted bones. The air was thick with moisture and the smell of decay. He waded into the shallows, testing the bottom with each step. When he found solid ground, he moved to a fallen log half submerged in the water and began to work. From his time in the fields, he had learned which plants grew where. He knew the difference between vines that broke easily and those that held weight. He knew how to sharpen wood against stone, how to set tension in a branch so it would spring when released. He worked quickly but carefully. A snare here, hidden beneath leaves. A sharpened stake there, angled upward and camouflaged with moss. A vine stretched across a narrow path, low enough to catch a horse's legs but high enough that a man on foot might not see it until too late. These weren't the sophisticated traps of his homeland. He didn't have time or tools for that. But they didn't need to be sophisticated. They just needed to kill. From somewhere to the north, a gunshot cracked through the humid air. Then another. Then silence. Ben paused in his work, listening. A minute later, a scream cut through the forest, high, desperate, ending abruptly. One runner down. Ben returned to his work. He had maybe 4 hours before the hunters expanded their search pattern. 4 hours to prepare the ground. By the time the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, he had covered a 1/4 mile of swamp edge with traps and false trails. He used broken branches to suggest passage where there was none. He disturbed the mud in places that led to deep water. He left just enough sign to draw curious eyes. Then he climbed, found a massive cypress with branches that grew in layers, creating natural platforms. He went up 30 feet and settled into a spot where three branches met, hidden by hanging moss and shadow. Below, the swamp waited. The light turned gold, then orange, then purple. Insects began their evening chorus. Somewhere distant, an owl called. Ben heard them before he saw them. Hoofbeats, moving slowly. The jingle of tack and weapons. Low voices discussing which direction to search next. Three riders emerged from the tree line. One of them was Malcolm Hutchins, the colonel who had been so eager at breakfast. He rode a tall bay horse and carried a rifle across his saddle. The other two were overseers, there to track and guide. "Swamps ahead," one overseer said. "Runners don't usually come this way." "Then maybe this one's smarter than the others," Hutchins replied. "I saw tracks heading southwest. Could be we've got a live one." They moved forward carefully. The horses didn't like the smell of the swamp and tossed their heads nervously. Hutchins dismounted near the water's edge, studying the ground. "There," he said, pointing. "See that? Broken reed. Fresh. Something came through here in the last few hours." He led his horse forward on foot, following the false trail Ben had laid. The overseers followed behind, rifles ready. They moved single file along a narrow strip of solid ground between two pools of dark water. Hutchins was focused on the tracks. He didn't see the vine stretched across the path at chest height. Didn't see how it was tied to a bent sapling on the left side of the trail. His boot caught it. The vine snapped tight. The sapling whipped forward with all its stored tension, and the sharpened stake Ben had lashed to its tip moved faster than thought. It caught Hutchins in the throat. Went through clean. The point emerged from the back of his neck dripping red. He made a wet, choking sound. His hands flew to his throat, trying to stop what couldn't be stopped. Blood poured between his fingers. His eyes went wide with shock and terror, and the sudden, horrible understanding that he was going to die. He fell to his knees, then forward into the mud. The two overseers shouted, raising their rifles, spinning in circles looking for a target. But there was nothing to shoot. Just trees and water and shadows. One of them fired blindly into the canopy. The bullet whined off into darkness. "Where is he? Where the hell is he?" They dismounted, pulling Hutchins' body from the mud. But he was already gone. His eyes stared at nothing. Blood spread across the shallow water like oil. The overseers dragged the body back toward solid ground, glancing over their shoulders constantly, expecting attack from every direction. Their earlier confidence had vanished. Now there was only fear. From his perch, high in the cypress, Ben watched them go. His face showed nothing. No satisfaction, no regret. Just the cold calculation of a man who had done exactly what needed to be done. When they were gone, he shifted position slightly, found his hunter's whistle, carved from hollow reed during his work that afternoon. He brought it to his lips and blew, a sharp, clear note that cut through the dusk. The signal the hunters used to coordinate their movements, the sound that meant prey located, close in for the kill. He waited, counted to 10, then blew again. From somewhere in the distance, another whistle answered, then another. The hunters calling to each other, asking for location, trying to regroup. Ben smiled, a small, terrible smile. He brought the whistle to his lips a third time and blew the same sharp note. But this time, he let it trail off into something else. A mocking echo. A sound that wasn't quite right. A signal that promised everything and meant nothing. Dawn broke gray and cold over the swamp. Mist hung between the cypress trees like smoke, and the air smelled of rot and standing water. Near the edge of solid ground, the governor's men gathered in a tight cluster, their fine clothes now mud-stained and wrinkled. None of them had slept. They stood around two bodies laid out on canvas sheets, Colonel Hutchins, with the hole through his throat. Samuel Porter, one of the overseers, found at first light with his skull caved in by a heavy branch that had been rigged to fall from above. Both dead. both killed by traps set by a man they'd been hunting for sport. Governor Silas Vance paced back and forth, his polished boots squelching in the mud. His jacket was unbuttoned. His cravat hung loose. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands shook slightly as he gestured. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice pitched higher than usual, "we cannot let one slave frighten us from our purpose. This is still our land, our hunt. The sport only grows finer when the prey fights back." Senator Calloway, a heavy man with thinning hair, shook his head. "Silas, this isn't sport anymore. This is murder. 2 of our party are dead. We should gather our people and return to the house." "Return?" Vance turned on him. "You want to return? To tell everyone we were bested by a single darky with no weapons and no training?" "He clearly has training," said the other senator, a younger man named Whitmore. "Look at these kills. These aren't lucky accidents. This man knows exactly what he's doing." "Then we adapt," Vance snapped. "We bring more dogs, more powder. We smoke him out of whatever hole he's hiding in." But even as he spoke, his voice trembled. The confidence that had been absolute 2 days ago now sounded forced and brittle. Reddick Cole, the head overseer, spat into the mud. He was a wiry man with hard eyes and a face like weathered leather. "I've hunted runaways for 15 years, he said. "Never seen anything like this. This one's different. He's not running scared. He's hunting us back." "Superstitious nonsense," Vance said. But the words lacked conviction. "Is it? Then explain how he's moving through terrain we can't track. How he's setting traps that kill trained men. How he knows our patterns before we do." Cole gestured toward the bodies. "These weren't accidents. This was planned." Vance opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. For a long moment, he stared at the wrapped corpses. Then he straightened his shoulders and forced steel back into his voice. "We continue. Send word to the lodge. I want every dog we have, fresh powder and shot. And tell that boy Elias to bring torches. If we can't track this devil, we'll burn him out." The men exchanged glances but said nothing. They were afraid now, not just of Ben, but of what it meant that their carefully ordered world could be turned upside down by one man who refused to play the role assigned to him. Elias heard the order while standing near the edge of camp, trying to stay invisible. He was always trying to stay invisible. At 17, he'd learned that the safest place was the space no one noticed. The governor's voice carried clearly through the morning air, sharp with forced authority. "Elias, boy, get to the lodge and bring the items I requested. Move." "Yes, sir," Elias called back. He turned and started through the woods, following the well-worn path back toward the main house. His thin frame moved quickly between the trees. After a few minutes, the sounds of the camp faded behind him. The forest felt different now. Before, it had been familiar. Now, it felt watched. Elias kept his eyes moving, scanning the underbrush and the spaces between trees. He didn't know exactly what Ben looked like. He'd only seen him from a distance during the selection, but he knew the man was out here somewhere, watching, waiting. 20 minutes later, Elias found the body. It was Thomas Whitaker, one of the younger overseers. A man who'd taken pleasure in the whip, who'd laughed while forcing slaves to kneel. He lay face up across the path, eyes wide and staring. In the center of his chest, driven deep through ribs and heart, was a spear made of sharpened bone, lashed to a straight branch with strips of vine. Elias stopped. His breath caught. He'd seen dead bodies before. You couldn't live on a plantation and avoid death. But this was different. This wasn't age or sickness or even punishment. This was execution. Deliberate. Precise. The bone tip was carved to a wicked point and hardened black by fire. The kind of weapon that required knowledge, skill. The kind that came from a life before chains. Elias stood there for a long moment, staring. He should call out, alert the others. That was his duty. But his feet wouldn't move. Then he saw it. A shadow in the mist, maybe 30 yards away. Tall, broad-shouldered, perfectly still among the trees. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. His mouth went dry. The shadow didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching. Elias could shout, could run, could do what he was supposed to do. Instead, he slowly lowered his eyes, reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small cloth pouch. The bread he'd saved from his own breakfast. He set it carefully on the ground beside the path. Then he straightened and walked away, keeping his eyes forward, not looking back. Behind him, the shadow remained motionless. But Elias felt eyes on his back until he was well out of sight. He reached the lodge and gathered what the governor had demanded: dogs, powder, torches. But his hands shook as he worked, and his mind kept returning to that moment in the forest, to the choice he'd made without quite understanding why. That night fell heavy and dark. No moon showed through the clouds. The governor's party had retreated to a cleared area near the swamp's edge, where they built a large fire and posted guards in all directions. The flames pushed back the darkness, creating a circle of wavering light. The governor sat on a folding chair near the fire, a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a pistol in the other. His earlier bravado had drained away with the daylight. Now he just looked tired and old and scared. Senator Calloway and Whitmore sat across from him, silent. Cole and 2 remaining overseers stood at the perimeter, rifles ready, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. The dogs were nervous. They paced and whined, refusing to settle. Their handlers tried to calm them, but the animals kept their noses pointed toward the black wall of trees, hackles raised. "Useless mutts," Vance muttered. He took another long pull from the bottle. Then came the rustle. Soft, almost imperceptible, like wind through leaves, except there was no wind. Every man reached for his weapon. The overseers raised their rifles. Calloway stood, backing closer to the fire. Even Vance straightened in his chair, gripping his pistol with white knuckles. The rustle came again, closer, from the darkness just beyond where the firelight died. "Show yourself!" Cole shouted into the night. "Come out where we can see you, or we'll fill those trees with lead." Silence. Then, drifting through the darkness like smoke, a voice, deep, calm, steady. "Your hounds smell fear tonight, Governor." The voice hung in the air between them and the darkness. Every man froze. Vance's hand shook harder. He raised his pistol toward the sound, but couldn't see anything to aim at. "That's far enough. I'll put a bullet through—" "Through what, Governor?" The voice came from a different direction now. "Through the wind? Through shadows?" Cole fired his rifle blindly into the trees. The muzzle flash lit up twisted branches and hanging moss, but nothing else. The shot echoed and died. Silence rushed back in. "Hold your fire!" Vance shouted. "Don't waste ammunition on—" A rock sailed out of the darkness and struck one of the dogs in the head. The animal yelped and collapsed. Another rock followed, then another, coming from different angles, pelting the camp. The men ducked and covered their heads. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The forest went quiet again, except for the crackling fire and the heavy breathing of frightened men. "He's toying with us," Whitmore whispered. Vance said nothing. He just stared into the darkness, his face pale and slick with sweat. Rain began to fall an hour before dawn. It started as a light patter against the leaves, then built into a steady downpour that turned the forest floor into a slick mess of mud and rotting vegetation. Water dripped from every branch. The fire hissed and steamed as raindrops struck the coals. The governor's men huddled under makeshift canvas shelters, miserable and exhausted. None of them had slept. Every sound in the darkness had jerked them awake, reaching for weapons. At first light, Vance ordered them to move. "We're not waiting here like sitting ducks. We push forward, find tracks, find anything." They broke camp and moved deeper into the swamp. The rain made everything harder. Mud sucked at their boots. The dogs couldn't pick up scents through the downpour. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 yards through the sheets of water. Cole led the way, rifle raised, eyes scanning. Behind him came Vance, then the senators, then the remaining overseer, a scarred man named Reddick, who kept his hand on the pistol at his belt. They'd been walking for an hour when they saw smoke. "There!" Calloway pointed. Through the rain, a thin column of gray rose from somewhere ahead. "He's got a fire going." "Fool mistake," Cole said. "Rain or not, smoke gives him away." They moved toward it carefully, weapons ready. The smoke grew thicker. Then they found it. A small fire built in a depression between two fallen logs, protected from the rain by an overhang of roots. But no one was there. "Decoy!" Cole spat. "Damn it, he's leading us around." They heard another shout from behind them. One of the men had found a second fire, this one off to the east. Then a third was spotted to the north. "He's lighting them all around us," Whitmore said, his voice rising, "making us chase our tails." "Then we ignore them," Vance said. "We pick a direction and we—" A scream cut him off, sharp and sudden, then abruptly silent. They ran toward the sound and found one of the dog handlers face down in the mud. He'd stepped into what looked like solid ground, but had actually been a thin crust of moss over deep bog water. He'd sunk to his chest before anyone could grab him, the weight of his rifle and ammunition dragging him down. By the time they reached him, only his hand was visible above the surface. They tried to pull him out, but the suction was too strong. His fingers slipped from Cole's grip and disappeared beneath the dark water. "God Almighty!" Calloway whispered. "God Almighty!" From somewhere in the rain-soaked forest came a sound, low and rolling, almost like a bird call, but wrong somehow, hollow and echoing. The remaining dogs went crazy, barking and straining against their leads. Then another call answered it. Then another, coming from different directions, surrounding them. "That's not birds," Reddick said. "That's him. He's calling to something." "There's only one of him!" Vance shouted. "One man! Stop acting like children afraid of the dark!" But his voice cracked on the last word. The calls continued, weaving through the rain, impossible to locate. The dogs pulled so hard their handlers could barely hold them. One broke free and ran into the underbrush, baying. They heard it crash through the woods for maybe 20 seconds. Then it yelped once and went silent. "That's it," Senator Calloway said. "That's it. I'm done. This is madness, Silas. We're going back to the house. You'll go back when I say—" "No, I won't. You can stay out here and play games with your ghost if you want. But I'm leaving while I still can." Calloway turned and started walking back the way they'd come. Whitmore hesitated, then followed him. Vance watched them go, his face red with rage and humiliation. "Cowards! Yellow-bellied cowards, the both of you!" They didn't turn around. Cole looked at Vance, then at Reddick. "Governor, maybe we should—" "No, we're not retreating. We're going to end this." Vance's eyes had taken on a wild, desperate quality. "I know how to handle this. We'll smoke him out. Burn the underbrush. These swamps might be wet, but there's enough dead wood and dry spots that a good fire will spread. We'll flush him into the open and put him down like the animal he is." Cole nodded slowly. "Could work. Risky, but could work. Then do it. Gather materials. We'll start the burn by nightfall." Elias had been trailing behind the main party, carrying extra supplies. He heard every word. His stomach turned cold. They were going to burn the swamp. Burn everything. Kill Ben, and probably destroy half the forest doing it. He had to warn him. When the men stopped to rest and plan their fire, Elias slipped away. He moved quickly through the rain, abandoning the path, cutting through the underbrush toward where he thought Ben might be. His heart hammered. If they caught him, they'd know what he was doing. But he couldn't just stand by. He'd gone maybe a quarter mile when a hand clamped over his mouth from behind. "Where are you sneaking off to, boy?" Reddick's voice was a low growl in his ear. The overseer spun Elias around and backhanded him across the face. Elias hit the mud hard. "You trying to warn him? That it?" Reddick kicked him in the ribs. "You helping that black devil?" "No, I just needed to—" Another kick cut him off. Then another. Reddick pulled him up by his shirt and slammed a fist into his stomach. Elias doubled over, gasping. "You want to run with the slaves?" Reddick snarled. "Then maybe I'll treat you like one." He beat Elias methodically, professionally. Fists to the body, strikes to the head, a boot to the kidney. When Elias stopped trying to defend himself and just curled up on the ground, Reddick spat on him and walked away. "Stay down, boy. You move from that spot before I come back, and I'll kill you slow." Elias lay in the mud, rain pouring over him, tasting blood. Everything hurt. His vision swam. Darkness crept in at the edges. He didn't know how long he lay there. Could have been minutes. Could have been an hour. Then he felt hands on him. Strong hands lifting him gently. He tried to open his eyes, but one was swollen shut. Through the other, he saw a dark face above him. Calm. Focused. Ben. The man carried him like he weighed nothing, moving through the forest with sure steps despite the rain and mud. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness. When awareness returned, he was lying under an overhang of rock, sheltered from the rain. Ben knelt beside him, wrapping his ribs with strips of cloth torn from someone's shirt. Elias tried to speak, but his split lip made it difficult. They're going to— "Don't talk," Ben said quietly. His English was precise, touched with an accent that rolled the consonants. "Rest?" "No." Elias grabbed Ben's wrist. "Tonight, they're burning the swamp to flush you out." Ben went still, his dark eyes fixed on Elias's face. "Nightfall," Elias managed. "They're starting at nightfall." Ben looked out at the rain-soaked forest, thinking. Then he nodded once and stood. He moved to a nearby cypress tree, its massive trunk thick with age. From his makeshift belt, woven from vines and strips of cloth, he pulled a piece of sharpened stone. He began to carve into the bark. Elias watched through his good eye. The symbols Ben carved were intricate, circular patterns, angular marks, things that looked like stylized animals or spirits. War signs, Elias thought. Warnings. When Ben finished, he stepped back and studied his work. Then he turned to Elias and crouched beside him again. "By dawn," Ben said softly, his voice carrying absolute certainty, "he will beg the swamp to take him." Late night brought no relief from the rain. Wind screamed through the pines, bending them nearly double. The hunting lodge sat dark against the storm, except for candlelight flickering in the windows. Inside, the remaining men crowded around a stone fireplace. 6 had started the day's hunt. 4 remained. Governor Vance, Cole, Reddick, and one other overseer named Dutch. The senators had made it back to the main house hours ago, refusing to continue. "Should have burned him out when we had daylight," Cole muttered. He stood by the window, rifle across his chest, staring into the darkness. "Now we're sitting here like rats in a barrel." "We'll burn him tomorrow," Vance said. His voice was tight, controlled, too controlled. "First light, we set the fires. End this, if we make it to first light," Dutch said. He was a thick man with a scar across his nose, usually fearless. Now his hands shook as he loaded his pistol. "That thing out there ain't natural. Ain't no regular slave moving like that." "He's a man," Vance snapped. "Flesh and blood like any other. You're letting fear make you stupid." "Fear keeps you alive," Dutch shot back. "And I'm plenty afraid of what's out there." Cole turned from the window. "Governor, with respect, we need more men. We should ride back to the main house, get everyone armed, come back in force. And let him think he's won?" Vance stood, his face flushed. "Let him believe he can make us run? No. We hold here. Come morning, we hunt him down properly." "2 men are dead," Cole said. "Another missing. The dogs are gone. At what point do we admit this hunt went wrong?" "It hasn't gone wrong. It's simply taken an interesting turn." Vance poured himself whiskey with hands that trembled slightly. "We anticipated sport. We received it. The fact that our prey has teeth makes the victory sweeter." "Sweeter?" Dutch laughed, high and sharp. "Man, you've lost your damn mind." Vance whirled on him. "Watch your tongue, or I'll—" A sound cut him off. A scraping. Metal on wood. Coming from somewhere outside. All 4 men froze. "What was that?" Dutch whispered. Cole moved to the window again, peering out into the rain-lashed darkness. "Can't see anything. Could have been a branch." "Branches don't sound like that," Reddick said. He'd been quiet until now, sitting in the corner, cleaning his knife. "That was deliberate." "The guards," Vance said. "Check on the guards." Cole went to the front door and cracked it open. "Hayes? Wilson? You out there?" No answer except the wind and rain. "Hayes, report." Nothing. Cole slammed the door and threw the bolt. "They're not answering." "Maybe they can't hear over the storm," Dutch said, but his voice had no conviction. "Maybe they're dead," Reddick said flatly. He stood and moved to the back door, testing the lock. Maybe he already picked them off. "There were 4 guards," Vance insisted. 4 armed men. He can't have— Glass exploded inward. A window on the east side shattered, and something flew through. A torch. Burning cloth wrapped around a stick. It landed in the middle of the room, flames spreading across the wooden floor. "Put it out!" Vance shouted. Dutch grabbed a blanket and smothered the flames, but smoke was already filling the room. Then another window broke. Another torch. Then a third from the opposite side. "He's surrounding us!" Cole fired his rifle through the broken window at nothing but darkness. Smoke thickened. The men coughed, eyes watering. Reddick kicked open the back door for air and immediately reeled back. "There's someone!" A figure burst through the smoke. Dark skin, broad shoulders, moving with impossible speed. Ben. He crashed into Cole like a battering ram, driving him into the wall. Cole's rifle clattered away. Ben's fist connected with his jaw once, twice, and Cole dropped. Dutch raised his pistol, but Ben was already moving. He swept Dutch's legs, dropped him to the floor, and stomped on his gun hand. Bones cracked. Dutch screamed. Vance fumbled for his pistol, but his hands were shaking too badly. Ben crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. The governor clawed at Ben's arm, gasping. "Outside," Ben said. His voice was utterly calm. "Now." He dragged Vance through the back door into the pouring rain. The governor stumbled, fell to his knees in the mud. Ben hauled him to a wooden post that supported the lodge's rear overhang and slammed him against it. From somewhere he produced rope, probably taken from the guards, and bound Vance's wrists behind the post, then his ankles. Inside the lodge, Dutch was still screaming. Cole groaned, semi-conscious. Smoke poured from the windows. Vance struggled against the ropes. "You can't— This is— I'll have you—" Ben crouched in front of him. Rain poured over them both. In the flickering light from the burning lodge, Ben's face was carved stone. No anger, no rage, just absolute certainty. "You built your heaven on others' screams," Ben said quietly. "Now listen to them call your name." From inside came shouting. Dutch and Cole had recovered enough to move. They burst out the front door, coughing, weapons abandoned in the smoke. They saw Vance tied to the post and froze. "Help me, you fools!" Vance shouted. "Shoot him!" But Ben was already gone, melted back into the darkness. Dutch and Cole looked at each other, then at the burning lodge, then at the forest. Without a word, they ran. Not toward Vance, away from him, into the swamp, into the night, choosing the unknown over what they'd just witnessed. "Cowards!" Vance screamed after them. "Yellow-bellied cowards! Come back here!" His voice was swallowed by thunder. Then came the shot. The crack of a rifle cut through the rain. Ben, standing near the tree line, jerked and fell. His leg buckled beneath him. From the side of the lodge emerged Reddick, rifle raised. Behind him came 6 more men, overseers from the main house, armed with torches and weapons. "Got him," Reddick said. He worked the rifle's action, chambering another round. "Got the bastard." Ben tried to rise, but his leg wouldn't support him. Blood spread across the mud beneath him, mixing with rainwater. Vance's laughter broke through the sound of the storm, high and sharp and edged with hysteria. "Did you think I'd fall to a savage? Did you actually believe you could touch me and live?" The reinforcements surrounded Ben. 2 grabbed his arms, hauling him upright despite his wounded leg. He didn't struggle, didn't cry out. Reddick cut Vance free. The governor stood, rubbing his wrists, his clothes soaked and muddy but his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Bring him," Vance said. "Drag him back to the house. I want him in chains before dawn." He stepped close to Ben, close enough to smell blood and rain. "Your hunt is over, boy. Mine continues." Ben's head hung forward, rain dripping from his hair. But his eyes, when they lifted to meet Vance's, held no defeat. Only patience. They dragged him away through the mud, leaving dark trails of blood behind them. The hunting lodge burned low, smoke rising into the storm-torn sky. Dawn came gray and cold. The storm had passed, leaving everything soaked and dripping. In the plantation barn, Ben lay on packed dirt floor, his leg wrapped in filthy cloth that did nothing to stop the bleeding. Heavy chains ran from his wrists to an iron ring bolted into the support beam. His breath came shallow and steady despite the pain. The barn door creaked open. Morning light spilled across the floor. Governor Vance entered, flanked by Reddick and 2 other overseers. The governor had changed into fresh clothes, clean shirt, polished boots, gold watch chain gleaming. He looked like he was preparing for a ball, not an execution. "Still breathing," Vance observed. He nudged Ben's wounded leg with his boot. Ben's jaw tightened, but he made no sound. "Good. Wouldn't want you dying before tonight's entertainment." "What are you planning?" Reddick asked. "Something memorable." Vance crouched beside Ben, studying him like an interesting specimen. "We'll release him at sunset. Give him his sporting chance. But this time, everyone watches. The slaves, the household, the guests. Everyone sees what happens when property forgets its place." "He can barely walk," Reddick said. "Then he won't run far." Vance smiled. "Which makes the lesson clearer, doesn't it? That even at their strongest, their cleverest, their most dangerous, they still fall. Order must be restored. Fear must be reinstated." He stood, brushing dirt from his trousers. "Have the field prepared. I want torches, seating for guests, wine and refreshments. Make it a spectacle." "Yes, Governor." "And bring the slaves from the quarters, all of them. Let them watch their champion bleed." After they left, Ben closed his eyes. His leg throbbed with each heartbeat. The bullet had gone clean through but torn muscle and tendon. Even if he could break the chains, he couldn't run, couldn't fight. The governor had won through simple, brutal patience. Time passed slowly. The barn grew warmer as the sun climbed higher. Through the gaps in the walls, Ben heard activity. Hammering, shouting, the sound of preparation. They were building his death like theater. Footsteps approached. The door opened again. "Please," a woman's voice said. Soft, but desperate. "Please, listen to reason." Ben opened his eyes. Margaret Vance stood in the doorway, still in her morning dress, her face pale and drawn. Behind her stood Silas, his expression cold. "There's been enough blood," Margaret continued. "Enough death. Let him go. Sell him if you must, but end this madness." "Madness?" Silas's voice was dangerously quiet. "What's mad about maintaining order?" "Maintaining?" Margaret turned to face her husband. "You've turned our home into an abattoir. Good men have died in your game. And for what? Pride? Entertainment? For necessity?" Silas stepped closer to her. "Every slave on this plantation needs to understand the cost of defiance. Not just understand it, fear it. This man made fools of us, killed our people. That cannot stand unanswered. He was defending his life. He was property that forgot its function." Silas's hand moved faster than Margaret could react. The slap echoed through the barn. She stumbled backward, hand flying to her reddening cheek. Ben's chains rattled as he tried to rise. Silas turned on him. "Stay down, boy. You'll have your chance to stand soon enough." He grabbed Margaret's arm and pulled her toward the door. "And you will attend tonight's event. You will smile. You will play the gracious hostess. Or by God, you'll learn the same lesson he's about to." The door slammed shut. Margaret's muffled sobs faded as Silas dragged her away. Ben lay back down. The chains felt heavier now. Hopelessness was a weight pressing on his chest, harder than iron. Hours crawled past. The sun reached its peak and began its descent. Ben drifted in and out of consciousness, blood loss making the world soft and distant. The door opened again, quieter this time. "Don't move," a young voice whispered. "I only got a minute." Elias. The servant boy crept inside, carrying a tin cup of water. His face was bruised from Reddick's beating, one eye swollen nearly shut. He knelt beside Ben and lifted the cup to his lips. Ben drank gratefully. The water was cool and clean. When the cup was empty, Elias produced a key, small, brass, probably stolen from an overseer's quarters. "I can unlock the wrist chains," Elias said. "Just for a moment. Get the blood flowing again before tonight." He fit the key into the lock and turned it. The manacles sprang open. Ben's arms dropped to his sides, muscles screaming as circulation returned. Elias quickly massaged Ben's wrists, working feeling back into the hands. "I'm sorry," Elias said. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more. Couldn't stop them." "You gave me water in the forest," Ben said quietly. His accent was thicker now, exhaustion pulling at his words. "You warned me about the fire. You have done more than most would dare. It wasn't enough. It kept me alive." Ben looked at the boy, really looked at him, saw the bruises, the fear, the desperate need to do something good in a world built on evil. "This must end tonight." "I know." Elias glanced toward the door. "The governor's planning something terrible. He's making it into a celebration. Wine, music, guests from 3 counties. He wants everyone to see you die. Then everyone will see." Ben's hands closed into fists, testing their strength. "But not what he expects." "What do you mean?" "The signals I taught the others, the drum patterns, the hand signs. Do they remember?" Elias nodded slowly. "I think so. I've seen them using them when the overseers aren't looking." "Good." Ben reached out and gripped Elias's shoulder. "When the hunt begins, stay close to the main house, near the water barrels. When you see smoke, soak yourself and run for the road. Don't look back. You're planning something." "I'm ending something." Ben released him. "Now lock the chains again before someone comes." Elias hesitated, then secured the manacles. The metal clicked shut. He stood and moved to the door. "Elias!" The boy turned back. "Thank you." The boy nodded once and slipped outside. Sunset came painted in orange and red. Ben heard the gathering crowd. Laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses. Through the barn walls, he saw torchlight flickering. The spectacle was assembling. Footsteps approached. Many of them. The door swung wide. Reddick entered with 4 other men, all armed. "Time to perform, boy." They unchained him from the beam, but left his wrists bound. Two men grabbed his arms and hauled him upright. His wounded leg buckled, but they held him up, half dragging him toward the door. Outside, the scene was grotesque. The main field had been transformed into an amphitheater of cruelty. Chairs arranged in semicircles for the white guests, standing room behind for the slaves, forced to watch. Torches planted in the ground every few feet, casting dancing shadows. Tables laden with food and wine. The governor sat in the center on a raised platform, Margaret beside him looking pale and hollow. He stood as Ben was dragged forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vance called out. His voice carried across the field. "Tonight you witness justice, not the justice of courts and laws, but the natural justice of order restored. This man, this property, forgot his place, murdered good men, disrupted the peace of civilized society." Ben was forced to his knees before the platform. Around him, he saw faces, the enslaved people standing in their assigned places, fear and sorrow in their eyes. But underneath, in the slight movements of hands, the positioning of bodies, he saw readiness. "We give him one final hunt," Vance continued, "one last chance to run. And when we catch him, as we inevitably will, let his fate remind us all that some things are immutable, some hierarchies are natural, some people are born to rule." He raised his pistol. "And some are born to serve." The crowd fell silent. Vance aimed the pistol at the sky. Among the slaves, hands moved in signals Ben had taught them, quick, deliberate, passing messages through the crowd faster than the overseers could notice. Vance pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the evening air, and at that exact moment, flames erupted along the edges of the field, not from the torches, from the cotton storage barns, from the stables, from the fence lines where dry grass met old wood. Fire spread faster than any man had planned, faster than should have been possible, because it hadn't been planned by the governor. The slaves had planned it. Chaos exploded across the plantation as the flames climbed higher into the darkening sky. The gunshot still echoed across the field when the flames erupted. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. The white guests turned toward the sudden walls of fire rising from the cotton barns. The overseers reached for weapons that weren't there. They'd left their rifles at the stables, now consumed by orange light. The governor stood on his platform, his pistol still pointed at the sky, confusion replacing his theatrical confidence. Then the screaming started. "Fire!" someone shouted. "The barns are burning!" "The stables, too!" How? But Ben already knew how. The signals he'd taught the others during months of watching, waiting, preparing. The hand signs passed through work gangs, the drum patterns hidden in the rhythm of tool strikes. Every moment of apparent submission had been preparation. Every quiet conversation a piece of strategy. The slaves moved as one. Those assigned to the back fields cut the ropes holding the main gate closed and pushed it shut, driving wooden stakes through the latch. Men and women who'd been forced to stand and watch suddenly blocked the paths leading to the main road. Others ran toward the well pumps, not to fight the fires, but to tip the water barrels into the dirt, making the ground too muddy for horses to gain traction. Reddick's hands were still on Ben's shoulders when Ben drove his elbow backward into the overseer's gut. The man doubled over, gasping. Ben spun, his wounded leg screaming in protest, and brought his bound wrists down like a club against Reddick's skull. The overseer dropped. One of the other guards lunged forward. Ben caught his arm, redirected his momentum, and sent him sprawling into the nearest torch stand. The man's shirt caught fire. He rolled away, slapping at the flames. The remaining guards backed away. They were outnumbered now, surrounded by people they'd spent years terrorizing, people who suddenly had nothing left to lose. "Hold them!" The governor bellowed from his platform. "Someone contain this!" But his voice was lost in the chaos. The white guests fled in every direction, women screaming, men shouting for their horses. The slaves didn't attack them. Not yet. They simply blocked escape routes, herding the panic like wolves with sheep. Ben stumbled forward, his leg threatening to give out. Around him, the plantation burned. Smoke poured across the field, thick and black, turning the torchlight into a hellish haze. He could barely see 10 feet ahead. A figure emerged from the smoke. Margaret Vance, her dress torn, her carefully arranged hair falling loose. She grabbed a young girl's hand, one of the house servants, and pulled her toward the river path. Another woman joined them, then 3 more children. Margaret looked back once at the platform where her husband still stood, and something passed across her face. Not quite satisfaction, but not quite regret either. Then she was gone, leading the group into the darkness beyond the firelight. "Ben!" Elias's voice cut through the din. The servant boy appeared, stumbling through smoke, a rifle clutched awkwardly in his hands. "I got it from the weapons cabinet in the house. Nobody was watching." Ben held out his bound wrists. Elias understood immediately, and used the rifle's stock to smash the chain connecting the manacles. The metal broke after 3 hard strikes. Ben's hands were still cuffed, but now separate, giving him freedom of movement. "The slave quarters," Ben said. His voice was rough from smoke. "The children first." They moved together through the chaos. The quarters stood on the eastern edge of the plantation, away from the main fires but already filling with smoke. Elias used the rifle's barrel to break the locks on the cabin doors, while Ben pulled people out. Mothers clutching infants, old men too weak to run on their own, children who'd never known anything but these walls. "Go to the river," Ben told them. "Follow the north bank. Don't stop until you reach the Freeman settlement." "They'll track us," an old woman said. Fear trembled in her voice. "No." Ben looked back toward the main field. "They're going to be too busy surviving." One of the overseers appeared, running toward them with a pistol. Elias raised the rifle, his hands shaking. The overseer fired first. The bullet went wide, cracking into a fence post. Elias pulled his own trigger. The shot took the overseer in the shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the ground and didn't get up. Elias stared at the rifle in his hands, his face pale. "Keep moving," Ben said. Not harsh, almost gentle. "There's no going back now." The boy nodded and ran toward the next locked door. More slaves joined them as they worked through the quarters. Some grabbed tools, hoes, hammers, anything that could be a weapon. Others just ran for freedom, disappearing into the smoke and darkness. The organized rebellion was becoming chaos, but it was chaos that served their purpose. The governor's voice rose above the crackling flames. "Rally to me! All loyal men, rally!" Ben limped toward the sound. Through the smoke, he could see Vance on his platform, still trying to command his collapsing world. A few men gathered around him, overseers, guards, guests who'd been too slow to escape. Maybe a dozen in total. They formed a rough circle, weapons drawn. "We hold the center," Vance shouted. "They're animals. They'll lose organization. We hold, and then we take back what's ours." But even as he spoke, another building caught fire. The main house itself, flames climbing the white pillars like vengeful spirits. Someone had set it from the inside. Vance's face contorted with rage and dawning terror. He looked around at his burning empire, at the slaves who'd become an army, at the night sky turned orange with destruction. Their eyes met across the smoke-filled field. Ben and the governor, prey and predator. The man who'd built his heaven on screams, and the man who'd been forced to learn its language. Vance broke first. He jumped from the platform and ran. Not toward his men, not toward the house, toward the tree line on the western edge, where the cultivated land gave way to wild forest, toward the swamp where the first hunt had begun. Ben watched him go, counted to 3, let the governor believe he had a lead. Then he followed. His leg burned with every step, but he forced himself forward. Behind him, Elias called his name, but Ben didn't stop. This wasn't the boys' fight anymore. This was something older, something that had started years ago on a different shore, in a different life. The forest swallowed them both, hunter and hunted, illuminated by the burning fields at their backs. The swamp welcomed them like an old, patient god. Moonlight caught on the surface of black water, turning it silver in patches where the canopy opened overhead. Cypress trees rose from the murk like ancient sentinels, their roots twisting through mud that could swallow a man whole. The air hung thick and wet, carrying the smell of decay and growth tangled together, the scent of things ending and beginning in the same breath. The governor crashed through the underbrush ahead, his expensive boots sucking at the mud with every desperate step. Branches tore at his fine coat. Thorns raked his face. He'd lost his hat somewhere in the first 100 yards. His pistol had slipped from his grip when he'd tried to vault a fallen log and landed face first in stagnant water instead. "Help!" His voice cracked as he screamed into the darkness. "Anyone! I'm Governor Silas Vance. There's gold for whoever helps me." The swamp swallowed his words. Nothing answered except the chirp of tree frogs and the distant splash of something moving through water. Something that might have been an alligator, or might have been something else. Vance stumbled forward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind him, the orange glow of the burning plantation painted the sky. Smoke rose in thick columns, visible even through the trees. Everything he'd built, everything he'd owned, turning to ash while he ran like a common criminal through mud and darkness. It wasn't supposed to end like this. He was supposed to be untouchable, protected by law, by wealth, by the natural order of things. The strong ruled the weak. That was God's design, wasn't it? That was civilization, and he was strong. He'd always been strong. "I'll pay," he shouted again. "Gold, land, whatever you want." A sound came from behind him. Not close, but not far either. The crack of a branch, the whisper of movement through water. Vance spun, his eyes wide, searching the darkness. Shadows moved between the cypress trunks. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe his mind was creating shapes from nothing, from fear, from the knowledge that something hunted him through terrain he'd only ever seen from horseback during his carefully orchestrated games. He ran again. His lungs burned, his legs screamed. The mud seemed to grab at him with every step, trying to pull him down, to hold him in place for whatever followed. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The hunter returns to the place where the blood was first spilled. Vance's legs gave out. He fell forward into shallow water, his hands plunging into muck. He scrambled up, spinning in a circle, trying to locate the source of the voice. But the swamp played tricks. The words seemed to echo from every direction at once, bouncing off water and wood until they became part of the night itself. "Show yourself!" Vance's voice climbed toward hysteria. "Face me like a man." Like a man. Ben's voice came again, quieter now, closer. "You taught me men can be many things. Prey, sport, property." Movement to the left. Vance jerked toward it, but saw only moonlight on water. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. "I gave you civilization," Vance shouted. "I gave you purpose. You were nothing before we—" "I was a king." The words cut through Vance's panic like a blade. Ben stepped from the shadows 15 feet away, emerging as if the swamp itself had formed him from darkness and water. Blood stained his torn shirt. His wounded leg left a dragging trail through the mud, but he moved with purpose, with the calm deliberation of something that had already decided how this night would end. Vance backed away. His foot caught on a root, and he stumbled, but caught himself. You "You can't kill me. I'm a governor. They'll hunt you forever. They'll find bones," Ben said. "If the swamp gives them back." He moved forward, not rushing, not dramatic, just walking, step by methodical step, closing the distance between them. Vance turned and ran again, but his legs were finished. His body had nothing left. He made it maybe 20 feet before he tripped over another root and went down hard. His head cracked against something solid, a rock or a half-buried log. Stars exploded across his vision. Before he could push himself up, hands grabbed him. Strong hands that lifted him like he weighed nothing, like he was the one who'd been reduced to property, to a thing that could be moved and positioned at someone else's will. Ben dragged him through the water. Vance tried to fight, throwing elbows, kicking, but his strength was gone. Every blow landed weak and meaningless. Ben didn't even acknowledge them. He just kept moving, pulling Vance deeper into the swamp, toward a place where the moonlight barely reached. They came to a pit. Vance knew this place. He'd helped dig it himself years ago, back when the swamp had been a new hunting ground, and they'd needed somewhere to keep runners who tried to hide in the water. A hole in the ground lined with cypress boards, deep enough that a man couldn't climb out, narrow enough that he couldn't lie down. They'd kept slaves there for days sometimes, breaking their spirits before returning them to the fields. "No!" The word came out as a whimper. "No, please. I'll give you anything. Freedom, gold. I'll write the papers myself. You can go north. I'll give you money. Ben dropped him. Vance's back hit the mud at the pit's edge. He scrambled backward, but Ben was already there, standing over him, blocking any escape. "Mercy!" Vance gasped. Tears ran down his face, mixing with mud and blood. All his refinement, all his careful breeding, stripped away by pure animal terror. "Please, I'm begging you. Mercy." Ben stared down at him. His expression didn't change. No anger, no satisfaction, just that same terrible calm that had unnerved everyone from the moment he'd arrived at the plantation. "Mercy died with the first scream you ignored," Ben said. He grabbed Vance by the collar and dragged him to the pit's edge. The governor tried to grab onto roots, onto anything, but Ben was stronger, had always been stronger. The difference was that now, the chains were gone. Ben pushed him over the edge. Vance fell 6 feet and landed hard on the wooden bottom. His ankle twisted. Pain shot up his leg. He looked up at the circle of sky above him, at Ben's silhouette against the moonlight. "Wait! We can—" Rope fell into the pit. Heavy rope, old and frayed. The same rope that had bound runaway slaves in this exact spot. Ben climbed down just far enough to reach Vance, then pulled his arms behind his back and tied them. Rough knots, tight knots, the kind that wouldn't loosen no matter how much someone struggled. Then Ben climbed back out. "Don't leave me here!" Vance's voice cracked completely. "The fire's spreading. The swamp will burn. You'll kill me!" Ben looked down at him one last time. "You killed yourself," he said quietly. "Years ago, when you decided screams were music." He turned and walked away. Vance's screams followed him, pleas and threats and prayers all tumbling together into meaningless noise. The swamp absorbed them, just like it had absorbed so many others. Ben limped through the darkness, heading east where the land rose, and the water gave way to solid ground. Behind him, the sky grew brighter as the fires spread. Orange light crept through the trees, turning the swamp into something from a nightmare. Heat touched the back of his neck. The screaming continued for a while. Then it didn't. As dawn approached, the swamp grew silent. The fires had reached the water's edge and stopped there, hissing as wet wood fought against flame. Steam rose in white columns, drifting through the trees like ghosts searching for somewhere to rest. Ben kept walking. The sun would rise soon, and when it did, he would be somewhere else, someone else. The hunter returned home. The sun rose weak and pale through curtains of smoke. Ash drifted down like gray snow, settling on everything: the ruined buildings, the trampled fields, the bodies no one had claimed yet. The plantation that had stood for 3 generations was gone. Only blackened timbers remained, still smoldering, still hissing when morning dew touched them. The survivors moved through the wreckage like ghosts. They didn't speak much. Words felt too heavy, too complicated for what had happened. Instead, they worked in silence, picking through what remained, gathering anything useful. A cooking pot here, mostly undamaged. A bundle of blankets there, singed at the edges but still good. Tools that had survived the flames. Food from the storehouse that the fire hadn't reached. Elias moved among them, his young face aged overnight by what he'd seen. His left arm hung in a makeshift sling, injured when part of the barn had collapsed. But he kept moving, kept helping, organizing the chaos into something that might allow these people to survive the journey ahead. "The boats leave at noon," he told a woman cradling 2 small children. "The captain owes me a favor. He'll take you as far as Cairo if you can make it from there." She nodded without meeting his eyes. Trust came hard after a lifetime of broken promises. Near what had been the main house, Margaret Vance sat on a scorched bench, staring at nothing. Her fine dress was torn and filthy. A bandage wrapped her shoulder where burning debris had struck her during the escape. Her hands rested in her lap, motionless, as if they'd forgotten their purpose. Someone had told her about Silas, about what they'd found in the swamp pit when the fires cooled enough to search. She hadn't responded, hadn't cried, hadn't asked for details. She just sat there, looking east toward the river, toward somewhere that wasn't here. Elias approached carefully. "Ma'am," he said softly, "the boat. You should come with us." Margaret's eyes moved to him, but didn't seem to register his presence. "I wanted to stop him," she whispered. "Years ago. I wanted to say no. I know. But I didn't." Her voice cracked. "I let it happen. Every time. I heard the screams and I just closed my eyes." Elias didn't know what to say to that. He was 17. He didn't have wisdom for this kind of guilt, this kind of reckoning. So he just stood there until she finally stood, moving like someone much older than her 38 years. "The boat," she repeated. "Yes, somewhere else." Ben sat at the forest's edge, his back against a sweet gum tree, watching the activity from a distance. His wounded leg was wrapped in cloth torn from someone's abandoned shirt. Burns marked his arms and face where flames had gotten too close during the final push through the burning fields. Every breath hurt where smoke had damaged his lungs, but he was alive. And more than that, he was whole in a way he hadn't been since the chains first closed around his wrists years ago. Elias found him there an hour before the boats were scheduled to leave. The young man carried a bundle of food wrapped in burlap. He sat down without asking permission, wincing as his own injuries protested the movement. "They're ready," Elias said. "The boats, 37 people, counting the children." Ben nodded. "Good. You should come. Up north, you could—" "No." Ben's voice was firm, but not unkind. "My path goes different. They'll come looking. When word spreads about what happened here, they'll send hunters. Let them come." Ben met his eyes. "This is my ground now." Elias understood. Some things couldn't be explained, only accepted. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I wrote this, for the newspapers in the north. What really happened here. What the governor did. What you—" He hesitated. "What you had to do." Ben took the paper but didn't open it. "Truth is a weapon, too." "Yeah." Elias stood, adjusting his sling. "I guess it is." They didn't shake hands, didn't embrace. The moment didn't call for theatrical gestures. Elias just nodded once, turned, and walked back toward the gathering of survivors preparing to leave. Ben watched them go, watched as Elias helped people into wagons that would carry them to the river landing. watched as Margaret climbed aboard without looking back at the ruins of her former life, watched as children who'd been born into bondage took their first steps toward something that might be freedom. The wagons rolled away through the morning mist, following old logging roads toward the Mississippi. Their wheels left tracks in the ash-covered ground. Within hours, rain would come and wash even those away. When the last wagon disappeared into the trees, Ben stood. His leg protested. His whole body protested. But he moved anyway, turning away from the river road, heading deeper into the swamp. This was his place now, his territory, the land where blood had been spilled and debts had been paid. He knew every trail, every water source, every hiding spot. He'd learned them while being hunted. Now they belonged to him. He limped through the cypress groves, past the places where men had died, past the pit where a governor had learned what fear tasted like. The swamp accepted him. The birds didn't flee at his approach. The water didn't reject his footsteps. He found a high point where the land stayed mostly dry even during floods. Spanish moss hung from ancient oaks. A clear stream ran nearby. From here he could see anyone approaching long before they saw him. Ben gathered wood, built a shelter, set snares for food. Not because he planned to stay forever, but because a warrior needed a base camp, a place to return to between battles, because he knew there would be battles. Men like the governor didn't exist alone. They grew in clusters, feeding off each other's cruelty, justifying each other's sins. And when word spread about what happened at Vance Plantation, some would want revenge. Others would want to prove it couldn't happen to them. Let them come. The swamp would teach them the same lessons it had taught their predecessor. As evening approached, Ben carved something into the bark of the largest cypress tree. Letters he'd learned from watching Elias practice his writing. Crude, but readable. A hunter always returns. Then he moved deeper into the shadows, becoming part of the landscape, part of the legend that was already beginning to spread. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have hand-picked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.